We're going to look at some properties of parallelograms. So these are all parallelograms. What makes all of these a parallelogram? Well, in a parallelogram, opposite sides are parallel. Wow. The way that we write that is we would draw arrows to say that those opposite sides are parallel, and then we would put two little arrows right there to show that those sides are parallel. You could do that on any of these. I mean, like right here. Those sides are parallel, and those sides are parallel. Okay? Another thing is that opposite sides are congruent. Okay? Opposite sides are congruent. And the way that we would mark that on a shape is we would, draw a little tick mark and say, those sides are congruent. They're the same length. And then those sides are congruent. They're the same length. You could do that on any of these, that and that, that and that. Okay? Opposite sides are parallel and opposite sides are congruent. Okay? Let's look at some other stuff. Opposite angles, okay? Opposite angles are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Well, what do opposite angles look like? Well, they're opposite of each other. So, like, this angle is opposite of that angle. They are congruent. They are the same measure. So, like, if this is 60 degrees, then that's 60 degrees. If I wanted to show that these angles were congruent, those are opposite angles. They're congruent. I put 2 because we had already marked one set with 1. So these are congruent. They're opposite. These are opposite angles. They're congruent. These are opposite angles. They're congruent. Okay? Next one is adjacent angles are supplementary. I think it's an A-R-Y. I don't know. Supplementary. Couple vocab words here. What does adjacent mean? Adjacent means next door to it. I normally think about properties and you say that this property is adjacent to another one. If I'm at the outlets over there and I say, what's the property adjacent to Walmart? Then you would say the wonderful restaurant that is known as Sonny's, where they provide you with all-you-can-eat barbecue. Sonny's would be adjacent to Walmart. I think on the other side, maybe J. Moore Farms might be adjacent to it. I don't think there's anything in between there. Next door, adjacent. Supplementary. Supplementary means that two angles, okay, so these next door angles, add to give me 180 degrees. Add to give you 180 degrees. And the way that I remember that, I had a student one time tell me that the other word that goes with that is complementary, and complementary means the angles add together to give you 90 degrees. I had a student tell me one time that they remember that by if a fat person were to lose 90 pounds, you would give them a compliment. Great job. You lost 90 pounds. That's awesome. You are healthier now. If they lost 180 pounds, we might think that they took a supplement. Okay? So lost 90 pounds, we'll give them a compliment. Lost 180 pounds, they might have taken a supplement to help out because they weighed a lot to begin with. Okay? So what does that mean? Adjacent angles that are right next door to each other. That means like this angle and this angle would add to give me 180 degrees. So like if this were, I don't know, 60 right there, that means this one would have to be 120 because they would have to add together to give me 180. If this one was 40, then the one right next door to it would have to be 140 because they add together to give you 180. Likewise, we talked about how opposite angles are congruent. So like if that's 40, we said that this one is opposite of it, this one would be 40. And if this is 140, the one opposite of it would be 140. Okay? One more. Diagonals bisect each other. And I think that the word is dissect that you deal with in biology when you cut all the animals and stuff open. And so I always think about bisect. We're going to cut something in half. It's going to be in two pieces then, okay? So cut in half. The next question is, what's a diagonal? Well, a diagonal is this line. It goes from one corner to the opposite corner like that. And then this one goes from right there to right there. What a terrible line. Whew. But these diagonals, these lines that I just drew, cut each other in half. Okay? So like that means that that is congruent to that now. And that is congruent to that now. Okay? You could have done this on any of these. You could have done it on, let's do this one. That diagonal cuts that one in half, and this one cuts that one in half. So like that's congruent to that, and that is congruent to that. So that discussion leads us to this. For what value of x is the quadrilateral a parallelogram? Well, it's going to be a parallelogram when the diagonals bisect each other. Okay, so these are diagonals, and I know that this is congruent to this. So I would say 3x plus 1 equals 5x minus 9, and solve. So I'm going to bring the 3x over here, and then I'm going to add the 9 over here, all in one step. Okay? Divide by 2, x equals 5. Next one. I've got some adjacent angles, adjacent meaning right next door to each other. Okay? They're right next door. And adjacent angles are supplementary. Supplementary means took a supplement, lost 180 degrees, 180 pounds. So these are going to add together to give me 180 degrees. So I'm going to say 4x plus 11 plus 10x plus 1 equals 180 degrees. So we're solving for x here. So we're just adding these things, so combining like terms here. I'll add 4x and 10x, that's 14x. 11 and 1, that's 12. I'm going to subtract the 12 over here and have 14x equals 168 maybe. And I think when you divide by 14, 12 maybe, hopefully. Okay, so let's look over here. This one would be the same thing as this problem. You would just set your two diagonals. This is congruent to that. 10x minus 33 equals 4x plus 15, and you'd solve for x. Okay, I think you might get 8. Okay, you might get 8. Next one. So this is similar to this problem over here. These were adjacent angles. These aren't adjacent angles. They're not right next door to each other. These are opposite angles. Opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent. That means they're equal. So let's subtract the 4x over here. That would be 4x plus 19 equals negative 1. Let's subtract the 19. And get 4x equals negative 20, divide and get x equals negative 5. And normally you could plug that x back in and it would make sense. But when you plug negative 5 back in, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So just moving forward, keep an eye out for that. We'll check our answers. Okay, so we're going to look at just a couple more. Let's find this sheet. I don't know, we got a lot of options here. So let's look at these over here. Number 2. These are adjacent angles, parallelogram. It tells us it's a parallelogram. So I'm going to say adjacent angles are supplementary. So 4x plus 16 plus 120 equals 180. Also, well, let's combine like terms over here. I got 16 and 120. What's that? 136. And then we'll subtract the 136 over. That's 4x equals 44, I believe. Divide by 4, you get x equals 11. And you could plug that back in. If it asks you to solve for the measure of angle t, You could say, okay, I'm going to take 11 and plug it back in over there. So angle T would be 4 times 11 plus 16. That would be 44 plus 16. That would be 60. Angle T equals 60. And that makes sense because if this angle is 60, the one adjacent to it is 120. They have to give me 180. Okay. Next one, number 4. These are opposite angles in a parallelogram. So I got opposite angles are congruent. 94 equals 13x plus 3. I'm going to subtract 3 over here. That would be 13x equals 91. And then when you divide by 13, that would give you 7. Okay? And same thing, you could plug in 7 over here. 7 times 13 would be 91. And then add the 3, that would be 94. Opposite angles are congruent in a parallelogram. Okay? Let's look at maybe 2 more. So we got some diagonal questions here. I'm going to look at 15 right here. It says XS is 6, so that is 6. And QS, that's this whole thing, is 3x. Okay? We know from our notes that diagonals bisect each other. So a couple different ways to do this. That means, when they bisect, that means that's equal to that. So that would be 6. So I could say 3x equals 6 times 2, or just 6 plus 6 is 12. Divide by 3, x equals 4. Okay? And let's look at 18. 18, it says DG is 13, and GF, so that's just this part, is 2x minus 1. Well, we know that the diagonals bisect each other, so those two halves are congruent. I could just say 2x minus 1 equals 13. Add the 1, you get 2x equals 14, x equals 7. We have different types of parallelograms here. These are squares, rhombuses, and rectangles. I'm going to start down here at the bottom right here. A parallelogram with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Everybody knows what that is. 4 congruent sides, 4 right angles. That's a square. Okay. Next one, a parallelogram with 4 right angles and the diagonals are congruent. Well, don't worry too much about diagonals right now, but a parallelogram with 4 right angles. Well, if a parallelogram has 4 right angles, looks like that. That would be a rectangle. We didn't draw a square. Square has 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Looks like that. And the top one, a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. The diagonals are perpendicular. Each diagonal bisects a pair of opposite angles. Well, let's just put a star maybe next to this first one. 4 congruent sides. That means it could, I don't know, something like this. Just as long as all the sides are the same. Kind of like a squished square maybe. All 4 sides are the same. This is known as a rhombus. Rhombus. Okay. All 4 sides. And it could look anything like that. All 4 sides are the same. Okay. So like the questions are normally like, is a square a rectangle? Well, what makes something a rectangle? It's got 4 right angles. Does a square have 4 right angles? Yes. So a square would be a rectangle. Is a square a rhombus? Well, a rhombus has 4 congruent sides. Does a square have 4 congruent sides? Yeah. So a square is a rhombus. Is a rectangle a square? Well, a square has 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Does a rectangle have 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles? No, it doesn't have 4 congruent sides. Is a rhombus a square? No, it doesn't have 4 right angles. It's just got 4 sides that are equal. Okay. So let's look at these. Name each quadrilateral for which the statement is true. We can have multiple answers. Equilateral, that means all the sides are the same. I think we're going to have rhombus. and square. Okay, those are when all the sides are the same. Equiangular, that means all the angles are the same. Square, that's an easy one. And then rectangle. Square and a rectangle. It can contain obtuse angles. Obtuse, what does that mean? Well, when you're in the, I don't know what grade, maybe 6th grade, your math teacher said obtuse and acute, and they always said itty bitty acute angles. So that means that obtuse is going to be the big angles, bigger than 90 degrees. So which one of these would have angles that could be bigger than 90 degrees? Well, the rhombus could, right? Because we could draw it like this. All 4 sides are the same. That thing's bigger than 90. So, and it says parallelogram up here. So, I mean, we could say a parallelogram. You know, if we had opposite sides are parallel like this, then that would be obtuse. That would be obtuse. Those would be greater than 90 degrees. Number 4, the diagonals bisect each other. I think it's going to be all of these. I think it's going to be all these because it's all these are parallelograms. So let's write parallelogram, square, rectangle, and rhombus. Okay. Let's slide down. Let's look at this one. Classify the quadrilateral, explain your reasoning. Well, that says 91 degrees. I see that all 4 sides are equal, so that's at least a rhombus. And I'm hoping that all the angles are going to be 90 degrees. They're not. If this one's 91, that one's 90, that can't be. It'd be 89 degrees. So this one would be a rhombus. This one would be a square. All 4 sides are the same. You got 4 right angles. Let's look down here. Classify it. Looks like a square to me. Explain your reasoning. All 4 sides are congruent, 4 right angles. Now we're going to solve for x and y. Since all 4 sides are congruent, we're going to find, so x's, I'm going to choose 2 sides where the x's exist. So those 2 sides are equal. So I can say 3x equals 5x minus 4. Subtract the 5 over, you get negative 2x equals negative 4. X equals 2. If I'm solving for y, I'm going to choose the 2 sides with y's in them. So like 5y plus 1 equals 2y plus 4. I'm going to subtract the 2y over and get 3y. I'm going to add, nope, subtract 1 and get 3. So y should be 1. And when I look over here, we're looking at a rhombus. And the reason is we have 4 congruent sides, but not 4 right angles. So just 4 congruent sides. So this is a rhombus. And I'm going to look at the y's first. So those are congruent sides. I'm going to say 6y minus 5 equals 3y plus 7. Subtract 3y, that would be 3y over here. Add the 5, that would be 12. Y should be 4. And if I'm looking for x's, so there's the only x. These are parallelograms. So I've got adjacent angles here. Adjacent angles. And adjacent angles are supplementary. That means they add together to give me 180 degrees. So plus 127 equals 180. That would be 2x, combine our like terms over here, plus 126 equals 180. Subtract the 126, that is 54, hopefully, and divide by 2, that is 27. There we go.